Well, good afternoon, Scott Baker, Sierra Holland. Hello to you both.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah, and if Sierra is here, I'm pretty sure that means it's a Thursday.
That's the day.
That's when she joins us. So,
Yep.
welcome everybody. Time for another edition of Lead Better, Field Note 1652. The title today, I think it's the first time we've specifically had one entirely just about an AI idea. AI tools are ideal for scenario planning. Pretty simple and actually very practical.
Yes. So this got me going a little bit on specifically how productivity is being impacted by the increased use or lack of use of AI. And so I found a study that has been conducted over the last year. They asked people in February, May, and in August to estimate how many additional hours they would have needed to work to get the same amount done if they had not accessed generative AI. And so they asked across and then did an aggregate accounting of all of that. And the prediction is that the typical worker in the United States is saving how much of their workday, do you think, as a result of AI? Would you guess it is more than 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes, Sierra Holland?
That's tough. I'd guess more. I'd guess more than 10 minutes.
It is, in fact, 7 minutes and 30 seconds. So,
Yeah, I figured because it was such a ridiculously low number that I was probably going to be wrong, but I said what I wanted the answer to be.
yeah. So my question to you, Scott, is what do you think is the key to this? Because those numbers do seem low. And then when we actually reveal the number, it's even lower. So you're like, is adoption not there? What's actually going on? Is there a problem with AI? What's actually going on with those low numbers that we're assuming should be much higher?
Well, what's interesting is that there have been recent numbers that go the other direction. Now, which ones are true? I don't know. We should probably ask an AI. I know when ChatGPT was rolling out 5.2 thinking version, they were saying that heavy users of that module were saving 10 hours a week. Now, I think the heavy users with that particular model are doing very specific kinds of tasks, deep cognitive work, right? That's the thinking module. And so maybe it's saving them a lot of time over things that they're doing. And sometimes those are things where the AI has taken a good while to get set up to do those things. So you might be like, well, we had to spend 100 hours figuring out how to get this to work as an agent in the way that we wanted to. But the theory is that it could over time do that. But I think a lot of this is still, there are some obvious applications that seem to work for a lot of people. And then there are just so many other things, we see them in ads all the time where we're like, I don't even think I want an AI to help me with that. And you get confused. So the point I think in this field note, which is for all of the things out there, we know that one thing that leaders need to do is think about best case, worst case scenarios all the time. This used to take a lot of effort and here's now you can just run it through different AI LLM programs. Is it going to be as perfect as if you got a bunch of MBAs together and spent 100 hours on it? Maybe not, maybe, but what you do know is it's going to happen in just a couple of minutes. And if you could start doing that more routinely, would you routinely get better output in preparing for all kinds of scenarios?
Yeah. It's interesting because to Mikey, to your point, I think people don't always understand the ways that they can engage AI. They think of AI as the thing that cleans up their emails, the thing that summarizes meetings, and they kind of let it stop there. Whereas the leaders that I'm working with and the communicators that I'm working with who are really pushing the bounds are thinking of AI as their thought partner. Obviously, we in our firm think about Alex as a thought partner in many types of ways. But this is such a specific application of how can you use AI to push your thinking further. That's something that we don't always think to do with AI because it's a machine. We're used to doing that with other humans. But one of the most powerful ways that we can work with and think with AI is as this thinking partner, this jesting partner, this debate partner, this machine that has so much expansive knowledge and experience being able to draw from those pieces of knowledge that when we as leaders are faced with some scenario that we haven't faced before, that's maybe high risk, that's challenging, that's very complicated. We might be able to see what are the big scenarios I should plan for. But we also can break those down further and think through what are all these mini scenarios that we need to be aligned on as a leadership team? And how can we use AI to point those out to us sooner and get aligned ahead of time? So that when that scenario and if that scenario comes up, we already have agreed on exactly how we're going to address it.
Look, I think that I did this before the podcast. Now, ordinarily, we'll say we don't use AI to write our field notes. I tend to not even use AI to think about how we're going to have these conversations. I said to an AI before we got started here, we're going to have a 15-minute podcast about this topic. What could go wrong? And it accurately, it predicted that Mikey would probably cough at about 6 minutes and 4 seconds into the episode and clear his throat repeatedly.
Ruining the whole
freaky.
thing.
It's freaky that it knew that. I don't even know how it did that. Now, I will say I did the prompt on the fly right before we started, and it probably wasn't a very good prompt, so I didn't get a very good answer, right? But it did point out a few things that are actually helpful in terms of how we even think about scenario planning, because you could be like, this is great. I can have an AI do my scenario planning. And just one of the things, because I'm not trying to look at the notes, because I'm trying to pretend like I'm looking at you people as I look into my webcam. It said, remember that AI doesn't have skin in the game, right? It doesn't really care about the outcome. Hopefully, if you're doing scenario planning with people on your team, other human beings, people that have a stake, their stakeholders, they're looking at this best case, worst case scenarios with a lot on the line. Now, if you even had a consultant or an outside human advisor, right, they don't necessarily have the same kind of skin in the game, but they have a responsibility to you. There's a professional obligation to think carefully. The AI was warning me that even as we do this, just remember, it's going to go through whatever it's going to go through, but it doesn't really care. And I thought, well, that's helpful to think about, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you, if you are using an AI as a conversational partner in the way that Sierra just recommends, one of the best parts about having a conversational partner is you ask them to evaluate you at the end, right? Or you're able to have a conversation where you know what their values are, and so you trust their evaluation in some way, even if they're disagreeing with you at some point in the back and forth. If a large language model is based on all of the internet, or even if Gemini is based on Google's values, at some point you hit the bottom of the values. If you don't know or trust where those values are coming from, does that concern you at all in your use of ChatGPT, for instance, as a conversational partner?
I mean, of course it has to. If you don't understand where the values are coming from or how it's been programmed, there should be some level of, skepticism when you're reviewing the answers themselves. But I would say it's all in really how far are you pushing the large language model to help you get smarter? Because I have a great example of this where I was working with a leader who needed to scenario plan for union negotiations. So in the organization that she leads, they knew that there was going to be a strike. They knew that there was going to be union negotiations. She had never led communications for a union negotiation before. But the first thing that they did was scenario plan. And because regardless of the values question that is really getting at what are the undertones of the responses going to be, or what might be skewed in the output because of that, more so I would focus on the fact that these large language models have access to thousands and millions of papers and perspectives on what happens in union negotiations.
Sure, right.
So she could turn to that and say, list out what are all of the scenarios that could happen at the different phases of a union negotiation, and how can we prepare our leaders for them in advance. And then they actually had time to work through messaging, work through responses, work through FAQs, work through leader guides. And it made them much more better prepared at the beginning because they knew how it was going to be in 8 months, even within a degree of variability based on the outcomes.
Beautiful example. And I'm guessing they got a lot of clarity, maybe had other inputs from human beings, but it probably actually did save them time. Like they never would have had the time or resources to put into that level of analysis to get that amount of information.
Exactly. It is unreasonable to turn to one of your colleagues and say, I want you to work through 100 scenarios that we might face in a union negotiation. Even if
Right,
that person
yeah.
is an expert in that area, and we have plenty of colleagues who have worked in union negotiations and labor relations for a long time, I could turn to them and say, what are the top 100 scenarios that we're going to face? But that's an unreasonable request. Think about how much
Yeah.
time that would take for another human to list out, think of the different nuances, and they still might not come up with the top 100, but just the 100 that they've seen that they can work through finding on their own. What's beautiful about AI is that it creates it in seconds, sometimes minutes, but most
Yeah.
of the time it is a very short amount of time at a very high quality because it is about probabilities. So
And,
go
and
ahead.
you might be on seconds in some of these for something that is that complicated. That's when you might put one of the LLMs to work. That's going to take a half an hour for it to really do the deep research, to track everything and pull it back down. But by the way, to Mikey's point about do you trust the values, I think the sign is when you ask the AI about the union negotiations, if the AI says, I'm off the clock, that'll be time and a half.
Yeah.
You know the values, right? That's
Yeah.
just a clue. That's just me thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it's funny though, my mind, and it's because I'm in the communication space, that my mind went to so many of the different scenarios that we face and that we lead through when it comes to communication, whether it's a merger and acquisition, whether it's people returning to the office, whether it's even just planning a large scale event. We have an event that is starting the first week coming up in January that I'm helping this client to plan. And I'm thinking now we should run this idea through AI. What are all of the possible scenarios that we might face when we are all in person the first week back in January? People are still kind of brushing off the cobwebs of what their winter break was. What are some of the scenarios that we should plan for? And what should we decide ahead of time so that when those scenarios come up, we already have a plan of action? So,
Right.
I mean, I could go on. I could think of probably 30 different scenarios we could plan for.
Yeah.
But that is the power of AI, is that it is tireless and you can ask it to do these really unreasonable things that you would never ask your colleague to do.
Those two requests that you made are very different, though. In the first one, you're asking about a very specific scenario where you can see that the objective nature of the research is there and available. And so because it's such a highly specified request, you could see that the results that it's going to return to you are going to be just as specific and probably more helpful. But if you're asking that, if you're prompting, and this is why the field note says, like, try a different prompt, like actually prompt it in such a way that, because in the second scenario, when you're just saying, give me anything that might be, you're not actually telling the AI in that sense to actually search for certain things, right?
Yeah.
How events go is going to be a really different return than how negotiations go for labor negotiations, right? And so if you can imagine what it is that the AI is actually going to be drawing on and searching, and you're actually giving it papers to do deep research, then you might have something that's really fantastic. If on the other hand you're just asking for a spitball with me, then just know what you're doing. You're spitballing, right? And so that's the thing that's been the most helpful in my framing of like how you treat AI and whether or not you should trust it. Like, it doesn't mean that you should eject. If you've got a very talented employee who can come up with scenario after scenario after scenario, but 90% of the time they're just telling the truth, 10% of the time they lie, right? If it was a human, we might think about, well, maybe we shouldn't, but if they're super talented, you got to keep them, right? And we don't think about, well, in our human to ratio, how should we actually treat this employee? You got to treat them like a very talented employee who will lie to you 10% of the time, right? So if you go into that with that kind of conversational barrier for you, limitation, then it becomes an easier thing for you to be able to wrap your head around how to use it.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because even in the event example, I would get more specific. I would say something along the lines of, this is the resort that we're going to be at. Here's the time of year we're going to be there. Here's the size of the event that we're planning. Here's how many days long it is. Here's a preview of what the agenda looks like. what are the common pitfalls that we might see when it comes to audio and visual technology? What are the common pitfalls that we might see when it comes to movement of people in from this airport when we have most people flying in from this part of the country? You know, the more specific you are, the more background knowledge that you can give it to tailor its response, the better the response is going to be. And sure, you have to take everything that AI does with a grain of salt and with a critical eye, but it can be such a great starting point that your team can then run with.
You're describing the exact way that I want to read Yelp reviews. Like I want to all 5,288 Yelp reviews, read them all and synthesize for me in like one report. That's how I want to be able to deal with Yelp. I don't know if they're there yet, right? But that would be a great.
I think we're getting close on that, and I think there's the scenario plan that you just described, Sierra. An event plan is even something where the AI can probably take into mind things that you wouldn't even think about. You know, we heard at our last firm meeting from someone helping to plan a major PGA event, and it takes years, right? But if you in this event in January, I have no idea where it is, and the AI is like, by the way, do you know that in that part of the country it's it's tarantula breeding season, so make sure people bring boots. You're like,
we will be in Florida, so it's possible.
Yeah, right. I never would have thought of that. But the last thing I would say is, in the field note itself, it talks about this idea that we've kind of touched on without being explicit, is do keep the conversation kind of going with the AI. Be aware, as Mikey was saying, they're sycophantic. They're going to want to please you. So say, look, poke holes in this plan as hard as you can, and then be unreasonable. Ask for lots and lots of ideas. And in the end, it's kind of the way when we talk to people about Alex, our leadership AI, if you just get one improvement in a month, one better decision, one better scenario plan, that may be the difference between world-class performance for you and your organization, next level. If you just got one brilliant idea. Well, just think if you just made this a part of your regular everyday scenario planning. Could be unbelievable.
Right.
Couldn't agree more.
Super. Great. Good to talk to you both today. Thanks very much for your time.
Great to see you too.
All right. Bye now.
See you.